The stinging slap of a lie echoed louder than the crash of the wine glass. For Rosa Reed, standing in the opulent dining room of the Gilded Spoon, it was the sound of her life hitting rock bottom. Fired, humiliated, and falsely accused of theft, she was cast out onto the cold city streets with nothing but a month's overdue rent and the worn silver pendant around her neck, her only link to a past she never knew. She clutched the familiar metal, a small, intricate compass, rose unaware that her public disgrace had been witnessed from a shadowed corner. She had no idea that the city's most powerful and enigmatic billionaire, a man haunted by his own tragic past, was about to see that very pendant and have his entire world come to a dead stop. The air in The Gilded Spoon was thick with the scent of money and roasted duck. It was a symphony of clinking glasses, hushed but important conversations, and the subtle scrape of silver on porcelain. For the patrons, it was an evening of indulgence. For Rosa Reed, it was another 6 hours on her aching feet, balancing a fragile smile and heavy trays. Rosa was not naive. She knew her place in this ecosystem. She was a ghost in a crisp black uniform there to facilitate luxury, not partake in it. At 24, her life had been a series of temporary addresses and transient connections, a consequence of growing up in the unforgiving churn of the foster care system. She had no family album, no childhood home to revisit. All she had was a fierce work ethic, a quiet resilience, and the silver pendant. It had been with her when she was found as a toddler, a silent, metallic clue to an origin story she'd spent countless nights trying to imagine. The pendant, a detailed compass rose with a tiny sapphire chip at the north point, was her anchor in a life that had always felt adrift. Tonight, her anchor felt particularly heavy. Her section included Table 7, occupied by the formidable Mrs. Delacroix, and her 2 scowling, silent companions. Beatrice Delacroix was a woman sculpted from disapproval, her face a mask of pinched entitlement, her fingers heavy with diamonds that caught the light and seemed to mock the humble surroundings of anyone earning an hourly wage. "Waitress," she'd snapped earlier without making eye contact. "More water, no ice this time. Do you think I enjoy the sound of melting ice? It's distracting." Rosa had simply smiled her practiced, polite smile. "Of course, madam. Right away." The real trouble started with the wine. It was a bottle of Chateau Margaux that cost more than Rosa's monthly rent. Mrs. Delacroix had made a great show of sniffing it, swishing it, and finally giving a reluctant nod of approval. Rosa poured the first glass with the steady hand of a seasoned professional. It was as she was reaching to top up the second glass that it happened. One of Mrs. Delacroix's companions, a man with a bored expression, gestured expansively while telling a story, his arm knocking squarely into Rosa's. The bottle tilted. A cascade of crimson liquid, a $1,000 tide, surged across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing onto the bodice of Mrs. Delacroix's cream silk blouse. A collective gasp hushed the surrounding tables. Mrs. Delacroix shot to her feet, a look of theatrical horror on her face. "You clumsy oaf. Look what you've done. This blouse is ruined. It's couture." "I am so terribly sorry, madam." Rosa began, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Your guest? My guest? Are you blaming my guest for your incompetence?" Mrs. Delacroix's voice rose to a shrill crescendo, drawing every eye in the restaurant. "You were careless. This is precisely the sort of service one expects from places that hire riff-raff." The restaurant manager, Mr. Henderson, a man whose spine was made of jelly and whose primary skill was appeasing the wealthy, scurried over. He was short and balding, and he was already sweating. "Mrs. Delacroix, my deepest apologies. Is everything all right?" he asked, ignoring Rosa completely. No, everything is not all right, Jonathan. She spat, using his first name to assert her dominance. Your waitress has ruined my evening and my attire. I expect the restaurant to compensate me for the damages. Fully. Of course, Henderson soothed. The meal is on the house, and we will of course cover the cost of the blouse. We'll handle everything. Rosa stood frozen, humiliated. She knew it wasn't her fault, but she also knew that in this world the truth was a currency she couldn't afford. She began to quietly gather the soiled napkins, her face burning with shame. Then Mrs. Delacroix's eyes narrowed. She let out a small, sharp gasp, her hand flying to her neck, then her wrist, then her fingers. My ring, she whispered, her voice suddenly laced with a new, more venomous accusation. My God, my diamond ring, it's gone! Panic erupted. The woman's companions started looking under the table. Mr. Henderson's face went from pale to ghostly white. My sapphire engagement ring. Mrs. Delacroix clarified her gaze, locking onto Rosa. A family heirloom. It was on my finger just a moment ago, during the commotion. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Rosa. You bumped into me. You were close to me. You must have taken it. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was absurd. It was impossible. But the certainty in Mrs. Delacroix's voice was chilling. Madame, I would never, Rosa said, her own voice, trembling now, not with fear, but with a rising tide of indignation. I didn't touch you, and I certainly didn't steal anything. Search her, Mrs. Delacroix demanded, her voice ringing with authority. Mr. Henderson turned to Rosa, his expression a mixture of panic and grim resolution. Rosa, empty your pockets. Mr. Henderson, this is insane, Rosa pleaded, her eyes darting around the sea of judging faces. I've worked here for 2 years. You know me. Empty your pockets. Now. His voice was cold, final. With shaking hands, Rosa pulled out the contents of her apron pockets. A notepad, a pen, a few crumpled dollars in tips, and a tube of lip balm. Nothing else. See, she said, her voice cracking. There's nothing. Mrs. Delacroix scoffed. She's obviously hidden it somewhere else, perhaps in her locker, or perhaps she slipped it off during the chaos. I want the police called. I want her arrested. That was the breaking point for Henderson. The word police, in his immaculately curated establishment, was a nightmare. He had to end this, and there was only one way to do it that didn't involve a scene with law enforcement. He had to offer a sacrifice. He turned to Rosa, his eyes devoid of any sympathy. Rosa Reed, you have caused a major disturbance, damaged a customer's property, and now you stand accused of theft. We have a zero-tolerance policy. You're fired. Get your things from your locker and leave the premises immediately. The words hit her like a physical blow. Fired! But I didn't do anything. My decision is final. Get out! He hissed, his face inches from hers. Don't make this any worse for yourself. Tears pricked Rosa's eyes, hot and furious. She looked from Henderson's cowardly face to Mrs. Delacroix's triumphant smirk. There was no justice here. There was only power and money, and she had neither. Swallowing the bile of injustice, she turned on her heel without another word. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down completely. She walked the long, lonely path to the staff lockers, the stairs of the diners feeling like tiny needles on her back. She cleaned out her locker, a pathetic collection of a worn-out sweater, a dog-eared paperback, and an extra pair of comfortable shoes. As she pulled her thin coat on her fingers, instinctively went to the cool metal of her pendant. She clutched it, the familiar shape of the compass, rose a small, solid comfort in a world that had just dissolved beneath her feet. She walked out the back alley door, the sounds of the restaurant fading behind her. The cold night air hit her face, and for the first time, She allowed a single tear to trace a path down her cheek. She was jobless, falsely accused, and utterly alone. She pulled her coat tighter, the silver compass her only warmth, and walked off into the indifferent darkness of the city, never once looking back. In a secluded high-backed booth in the far corner of the Gilded Spoon, Sebastian Thorne had been nursing a glass of scotch for 2 hours. He despised places like this, the performative wealth, the superficial conversations. But this restaurant on this specific night was a ritual. It was the 22nd anniversary of the day his world had fractured, the day his 6-year-old sister Anastasia had been lost to the waves. The restaurant occupied the same building that once housed a small family-run bistro his parents had loved. It was the last place they had all eaten together as a family before the ill-fated trip. Every year, Sebastian came here, sat alone, and allowed the ghosts of his past to sit with him. At 32, Sebastian Thorne was a name that commanded respect and instilled fear in boardrooms across the globe. He had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from the ground up in technology and private equity. His face was known from magazine covers, his success legendary. But the sharp, custom-tailored suits and the air of unshakable confidence were armor protecting a core of profound, unhealed grief. He had survived the boating accident that had claimed his parents and sister. He had been found clinging to a piece of wreckage. But Anastasia, sweet, bright-eyed Anastasia, was simply gone. Presumed drowned. Her body was never recovered. He had been observing the drama at Table 7 with a detached, cynical eye. The spoiled, theatrical woman, the weak, pandering manager, the young, flustered waitress. It was a tiresome little play he'd seen in 100 different forms. He felt a flicker of pity for the girl, but it was fleeting. The world was an unfair place. He'd learned that lesson at the age of 10. When the manager fired the waitress, Sebastian merely took a slow sip of his scotch. It was brutal, but it wasn't his business. He was about to signal for the check, ready to retreat back to the sterile silence of his penthouse when the girl walked past his booth. She was clearly trying to hold herself together, her chin held high, but her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. As she passed, a busboy carrying a precarious stack of dishes swerved to avoid another waiter bumping directly into her. A small, pathetic cascade of items fell from her open bag: a paperback book, a tube of lip balm, a set of keys. She let out a soft, defeated sigh and knelt to gather them. As she bent over, the simple chain around her neck swung forward, and the pendant that had been tucked beneath her uniform came into view, catching the dim, ambient light. For Sebastian Thorne, the world didn't just stop. It violently rewound, tearing through 22 years of scar tissue in a single brutal second. It couldn't be. His mind, usually a fortress of logic and calculated risk, became a maelstrom of raw, forgotten emotion. He wasn't looking at a piece of jewelry. He was looking at his past. He was looking at a ghost. The pendant. A silver compass rose. He knew every single detail of it without having to see it up close. He knew the 4 main points were slightly more rounded than a traditional design. He knew the E for east was stylized to look like a wave. And he knew with a certainty that stole the breath from his lungs that if he were to flip it over, he would find 2 sets of initials engraved on the back, LT and AT. Lucius and Anastasia Thorne. His father had them custom-made by a jeweler in Geneva. His was a heavy signet ring he never wore. Hers was this delicate silver pendant she never took off. His heart, a muscle he'd long considered dormant, began to hammer against his ribs with a force that made him dizzy. Anastasia. The girl Rosa, the manager, had called her quickly, scooped up her belongings, tucked the pendant back into her shirt, and straightened up. She didn't look his way. She just kept walking, her shoulders slumped, heading for the exit. "Wait," Sebastian croaked, but the word was a stranger in his own throat, barely a whisper. He pushed himself out of the booth, his legs unsteady. He threw a few $100 bills onto the table, his mind racing faster than it ever had during a hostile takeover. He had to get to her. He had to see that pendant up close. He had to know. He strode through the restaurant, ignoring the curious stares. He reached the front door and pushed it open, the cool night air, a shock to his system. He scanned the street. He saw her, a small, lonely figure, already halfway down the block, about to turn a corner. "Hey, wait!" He called out, his voice stronger this time, echoing in the quiet street. She either didn't hear him or chose to ignore him. In a few seconds, she rounded the corner and was gone. Sebastian stood on the pavement, the phantom chill of the Atlantic in 1999 prickling his skin. The city lights blurred around him. The noise, the people, the entire world faded into an insignificant hum. All that existed was the impossible image burned into his mind, his lost sister's pendant around the neck of a fired waitress. He was not a man who believed in miracles. He believed in facts, data, and tangible proof. But what he had just seen defied all logic. It was a 1 in a billion chance. It was impossible, and yet he had seen it. A new, unfamiliar feeling began to smolder in the pit of his stomach, displacing the cold grief that had lived there for 2 decades. It was a ferocious, desperate, and utterly consuming fire. It was hope. He turned and marched back into the restaurant, his expression now one of grim, unshakable determination. The patrons parted before him like the sea. He walked straight to Mr. Henderson, who was still fawning over a slightly calmed Mrs. Delacroix. Sebastian's presence was like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. Henderson looked up, his eyes widening, as he recognized the city's most formidable billionaire. "Mr. Thorne," he stammered, "an honor to have you this evening. I hope everything was to your satisfaction." Sebastian ignored the pleasantries. His voice was low, cold, and carried an unmistakable threat. "The waitress you just fired, Rosa Reed. I want her file. I want her address, her phone number, every piece of information you have on her. You have 60 seconds. Mr. Henderson's sycophantic smile dissolved into a mask of pure terror. Sebastian Thorne was not a man one displeased. The legends about his ruthlessness in business were whispered in every corner of the financial world. To have that cold, predatory focus directed at him over a dismissed waitress was a nightmare he couldn't have fathomed. "Her file, Mr. Thorne, Staff records are confidential." Henderson began weakly, his instincts for self-preservation warring with company policy. Sebastian didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply leaned in slightly, his grey eyes like chips of granite. "Confidentiality is a privilege you can no longer afford. You have a restaurant to run. A health and safety inspection is scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. A full financial audit of your parent company's tax records can be initiated with a single phone call. I can have this establishment shut down before you've had your morning coffee. Now I will ask you one last time. Where is her file?" Beads of sweat popped on Henderson's forehead. He swallowed hard. "Right away, Mr. Thorne. Right this way." He practically sprinted to his cramped back office, fumbling with a key to a filing cabinet. He pulled out a thin manila folder, labeled "Reed Rosa," and handed it to Sebastian with a trembling hand. Sebastian snatched it and flipped it open. The information was sparse. An address in a rundown neighborhood across town, a cell phone number, and a social security number. No next of kin. No emergency contact. It was the file of a person utterly alone in the world, just like Anastasia would be. He took out his phone and snapped a picture of the single page. He then looked at the two people still at table 7. Mrs. Delacroix was watching him with a mixture of awe and fear. "As for you," Sebastian said, his voice dripping with ice, "your meal is no longer on the house. You will pay for the wine you intentionally had spilled. And if I ever hear of you frequenting any establishment, I have a stake in which is more than you can possibly imagine. You will be removed. Am I clear?" Mrs. Delacroix, who had terrorized a manager moments before, could only nod her face, pale and her mouth agape. Sebastian turned and left without another word. As soon as he was inside his chauffeured sedan, the armor of the cold-hearted billionaire fell away, replaced by the raw urgency of a brother who might have just found a ghost. "Marcus," he said into his phone, his voice tight. "Change of plans. I'm sending you a photo, a name, Rosa Reed, and an address. I want you to find her. Now, be discreet. I don't want her scared off. Just get eyes on her. Confirm she's there. That's all. Marcus Thorne." No relation, but a man bound by a decade of loyalty and a shared past in the military, was Sebastian's head of security and his only true confidant. His voice came back calm and steady. "Understood. On my way." While Marcus mobilized, Rosa was living through the longest night of her life. She'd taken the bus back to her small, dingy apartment, the injustice of the evening churning in her stomach. The accusation of theft was what hurt the most. Her entire life she had prided herself on her integrity. It was the one thing she owned, the one thing she had built for herself. And in a moment, it had been stripped away by a rich woman's whim. She sat on the edge of her lumpy mattress, the single window looking out onto a brick wall. The eviction notice taped to her door seemed to mock her. She had been counting on her next paycheck to beg for another week from her landlord. Now that was gone. Panic began to set in cold and sharp. What was she going to do? Where would she go? Her fingers, as they always did in times of stress, found the pendant. She pulled it out and looked at it. The silver compass rose a guide, with no true north to offer. On the back, she traced the familiar, elegant engravings she had memorized as a child, ad astra per aspera. She'd looked it up once, through hardship to the stars. Below it were the initials LT and AT, who were LT and AT, her parents, a brother or sister. The questions were a constant, dull ache in her heart. Tonight the ache was sharper than ever. The pendant felt less like a comfort, and more like a cruel joke, a remnant of a life and a family she was denied. For a fleeting, desperate moment, she wondered what it might be worth. Could she pawn it? The thought felt like a betrayal, a severing of her only tie to her own history. She pushed the thought away, disgusted with herself. An hour later, Marcus arrived at the run-down apartment building. He was a tall, imposing man who moved with a quiet efficiency that made him seem to fade into the background. He didn't approach the door. Instead, he spoke to the building's disgruntled superintendent, a $50 bill making the man remarkably helpful. "Yeah, the girl in 3B, Rosa," the super said, pocketing the cash. "Got an eviction notice yesterday. Saw her packing this afternoon. Said she was staying with a friend for a bit, try and figure things out. No idea who or where." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Did she leave a forwarding address?" "Nah, girls like that, they don't have forwarding addresses. They just disappear." Marcus relayed the information to Sebastian. "The trail's gone cold at the apartment, Seb. She's already moved on. Landlord has no idea where." Sebastian was pacing the length of his vast, minimalist penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. Frustration, a rare emotion for him, was mounting. Disappear people don't just disappear. Find her, Marcus. Use whatever resources you need. Credit card activity, phone pings, social media, DMV records. I want to know where she bought her last coffee. I want to know where she is." "I'm on it," Marcus replied. "But a girl with no credit, a prepaid burner phone, and no car, it's like finding a needle in a haystack." "Then buy the haystack," Sebastian ordered, his voice strained, "and burn it until you find the needle." He hung up and stared out the window. For 22 years he had accepted that Anastasia was gone. He had built a life, an empire, on the foundations of that loss. Now a single glimpse of a silver pendant had torn that foundation apart. If it was her, if she had been alive all this time, living a life of poverty and struggle while he lived in unimaginable luxury, the thought was a knife to his soul. The search was on. Sebastian Thorne, a man who could locate any asset track, any stock, and uncover any corporate secret, was now hunting for one lone woman in a city of millions. And as the hours turned into days, the needle remained stubbornly, agonizingly lost in the haystack. Rosa Reed, it seemed, had vanished without a trace. 3 days passed. 3 days of maddening silence and dead ends. Marcus's team, the best money could buy, came up with nothing. Rosa Reed paid for everything in cash. Her phone was a cheap prepaid model that she'd stopped using the night she was fired. She had no social media presence, no driver's license, no credit history to speak of. She was a ghost, expertly navigating the cracks of a society built on digital footprints. Sebastian grew more volatile with each passing hour. His business empire, usually his sole focus, was neglected. Multi-million-dollar deals were left hanging. His staff tiptoed around him, terrified of the silent fury that radiated from his office. He was a predator, denied its prey, and his frustration was beginning to curdle into despair. Was he wrong? Did he imagine it? Was it just a similar-looking pendant, a cruel coincidence that had sent him on this wild goose chase? He couldn't accept that. His memory was eidetic. He knew what he saw. On the 4th day, pacing his office like a caged panther, he stopped. He was thinking like a billionaire using technology and money. He needed to think about the source, the restaurant, the incident itself. "Marcus," he said, calling his security chief, "stop looking for Rosa for a moment. I want you to change focus. I want to know everything about the woman from table 7, Beatrice Delacroix." "The customer?" Marcus asked, surprised. "The one who accused Rosa of theft. Dig into her, her finances, her husband, her social life. I want to know what she had for breakfast. I want leverage." Sebastian's voice was grim. He sensed there was something wrong with that picture, something too performative about her outrage. It took Marcus less than 24 hours to unravel the Delacroix's carefully constructed facade. What he found was dynamite. Beatrice's husband, Richard Delacroix, was on the brink of catastrophic bankruptcy. His import-export business was hemorrhaging money, and they were leveraged to the hilt. The couture clothes, the expensive wine, the flashy diamonds, it was all a charade. They were broke, and they were desperate. The ring she claimed was stolen, Marcus reported to Sebastian over the phone. The heirloom sapphire. She pawned the real one 6 months ago in a private sale to cover a gambling debt. The one she was wearing that night was a very good cubic zirconia replica, worth maybe $500. Sebastian stood perfectly still, the pieces clicking into place with cold, brutal clarity. It was a scam. "Looks that way," Marcus confirmed. "My analyst thinks she was planning to cause a scene and pressure the restaurant's insurance for a massive settlement for the stolen heirloom. The spilled wine gave her the perfect opportunity. The waitress was just a convenient scapegoat." A black, icy rage, purer than any he had ever felt, settled over Sebastian. Rosa hadn't just been fired. She had been framed, her life ruined, to facilitate a cheap insurance scam. "Arrange a meeting with Mrs. Delacroix," Sebastian commanded. "Here, my office. Now." Meanwhile, Rosa's situation had gone from dire to desperate. The friend she was staying with, another waitress named Sophie, had her own struggles and couldn't house her for long. Rosa had spent days pounding the pavement looking for any work, diner, coffee shop, bar, but the story from the Gilded Spoon seemed to follow her. A quiet phone call from a concerned Mr. Henderson to a few colleagues in the industry was all it took to unofficially blacklist her. No one wanted to hire an accused thief. Her money was gone. She was down to her last few dollars, and the gnawing ache in her stomach was a constant reminder of her failure. That evening, sitting in Sophie's tiny kitchen, she made a decision that felt like a piece of her soul was being carved out. She had to sell the pendant. With a heavy heart, she found a grimy, dusty pawn shop in a part of town she usually avoided. The pawnbroker, a man with greasy hair and suspicious eyes, examined the compass rose under a jeweler's loupe. "It's silver. Not worth much," he grunted. "I'll give you $50 for it." 50. Rosa's heart sank. But the craftsmanship is so detailed, and the little stone. The stone's a chip of sapphire, maybe. Too small to matter. The value here isn't the material, it's the make. This is a custom job. High-end, probably from Europe. Geneva may be judging by the style of the clasp. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "Where'd a girl like you get something like this? It's mine," Rosa said defensively, her hand hovering over it. "It's all I have from my family." "Right. Look, $50. Take it or leave it," he said, already losing interest. Rosa hesitated. Geneva. The word echoed in her mind, a place she'd only ever seen in movies. It was the first real clue about her past she'd ever had. Suddenly selling it felt even more impossible. "No," she said, pulling the pendant back. "I'm sorry, I can't." She left the shop, her heart heavy, but resolute. She would starve before she sold it. That single word, Geneva, had reignited a tiny ember of hope. At that exact moment, 2 miles away, Beatrice Delacroix was being ushered into Sebastian Thorne's penthouse office. The room was larger than her entire apartment, with a floor-to-ceiling window offering a godlike view of the city. Sebastian sat behind a massive obsidian desk, not speaking, just watching her. Marcus stood by the door, an immovable sentinel. "Mr. Thorne." Beatrice began trying to project an air of confused sophistication. "I was told you wished to see me. I'm not sure why I—" "Sit," he commanded. She sat. He let the silence stretch, a tactic he used to dismantle even the most hardened executives. Finally, he slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was a copy of the pawn ticket for her real sapphire ring. Beatrice's face went white. All the blood drained from it, leaving behind a sallow, terrified shell. "Your scam was pathetic," Sebastian said, his voice quiet but deadly. "You and your husband are bankrupt. You staged the entire incident at the restaurant to defraud their insurance company. And in doing so, you destroyed the life of an innocent young woman for what would have amounted to a pittance." I don't know what you're talking about." She stammered, her eyes wide with panic. "Don't lie to me." He snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "I have the power to not only expose you, but to personally finance the prosecution against you. You will be charged with fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. Your husband's remaining business assets will be frozen. You will lose everything. You will go to jail. Or," he paused, letting the alternative hang in the air, "you can help me." Tears began to stream down Beatrice's face, washing away the last of her composure. "Help you? What do you want?" "I want to find Rosa Reed," he said. "You owe her. You owe her more than you can ever repay, but you will start by helping me find her. You will rack your brain for every single detail of that night." Did she say anything? Mention anyone? A place she was going? Anything? Beatrice, now sobbing uncontrollably, tried to think. No, nothing. She just left. She was so quiet. Then a flicker of memory. Wait, the busboy. The one who bumped into her. He helped her pick up her things. He might have seen something, heard something. It was a small lead, but it was more than they'd had in days. "Marcus," Sebastian ordered. "Get back to the restaurant. Find the busboy. Get his statement, now." As Marcus left, Sebastian stared down at the broken woman before him. He felt no pity, only a burning need to right the catastrophic wrong she had set in motion. He was closer than ever, and he wouldn't let the trail go cold again. The busboy, a young student named Leo, was a font of information. Terrified but eager to help, after Marcus explained the situation and offered a generous reward for his time, he recounted the brief interaction with Rosa. "She was really upset," Leo said, wringing his hands. "When her stuff fell, I helped her pick it up. I saw her necklace. It was cool, like an old compass. She was talking to herself, kind of whispering. Something about Sophie's couch, not lasting forever, and needing to find a job before she ended up at the shelter." "A shelter?" Marcus pressed. "Did she say which one?" "Yeah, I think so. The one over on Westmoreland. The Haven House Shelter for Women. My aunt volunteers there sometimes. I think Rosa said she used to stay there years ago when she first aged out of the system." It was the breakthrough they needed. Marcus relayed the information to Sebastian instantly. "Haven House Shelter. It's a strong possibility, Seb. It fits." "I'm going myself," Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. He grabbed his car keys, forgoing his driver. This was not a task he could delegate. This was a journey he had to make alone. He drove through the city, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. His mind was a whirlwind of hope and terror. What if it was her? What would he say? How do you reintroduce yourself to a sister who thinks she's an orphan? What if she hated him for the life he'd had? The life she'd been denied? And what if, after all this, it wasn't her? What if it was just a final cruel twist of fate? He pulled up a block away from Haven House, a modest but clean brick building. He sat in his car for a full 5 minutes, composing himself, his heart threatening to beat its way out of his chest. He finally got out and walked to the entrance, a man who commanded global markets, feeling as vulnerable as a lost child. Inside the shelter was quiet and smelled of antiseptic and warm soup. A kind-faced woman at the front desk looked up. "Can I help you, sir? I'm looking for someone," Sebastian said, his voice huskier than usual. "Her name is Rosa Reed. I was told she might be here." The woman's expression was guarded. "We don't give out information about our residents." "Please," Sebastian insisted, leaning forward, his desperation overriding his usual command. "It's a family matter. It's urgent. Life and death." The woman studied his face, seeing past the expensive suit to the raw anguish in his eyes. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She checked in an hour ago. Room 204, but she isn't planning on staying. She's just gathering the last of her things from storage here. She's leaving the city tonight." Leaving the city? He had almost missed her. He took the stairs 2 at a time. The hallway was narrow, painted a pale, sterile yellow. He found room 204. The door was slightly ajar. He could hear the soft sounds of movement inside. He pushed it open gently. The room was tiny, containing only a metal frame bed and a small dresser. Rosa stood with her back to him, folding a faded sweater into a worn-out backpack on the bed. She looked smaller and more fragile than he remembered. His voice was a ghost of a sound. "Rosa." She froze. Slowly she turned around. Her eyes widened when she saw him, a flicker of confusion and fear in them. She didn't recognize him as the man from the restaurant. She just saw a tall, imposing stranger in an expensive suit standing in the doorway of her temporary room. "Who are you?" she asked, taking a half-step back. "How do you know my name?" "My name is Sebastian Thorne," he said gently, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to hurt you. I was at the restaurant the other night. I saw what happened. It was wrong." Her expression hardened. "If you're from the restaurant, I have nothing to say. I'm leaving. Please just 1 minute." He begged, his voice cracking. The sound of his own vulnerability surprised them both. "It's not about the restaurant. It's about your pendant, the one you're wearing." Her hand flew to her chest, covering the pendant protectively. "What about it? May I see it?" "Please, it's more important than you can possibly imagine." She hesitated, her fear warring with a new sense of curiosity. There was a desperate sincerity in his eyes that was unnerving but compelling. Slowly, cautiously, she pulled the chain over her head and held it out, keeping her distance. He didn't take it from her. He just looked at it, his gaze intense. "The sapphire chip," he whispered more to himself than to her. "At the North Point." He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. May I see the back?" Her heart started to pound. This man knew her pendant. With trembling fingers she turned it over. Sebastian's breath hitched. He saw the familiar elegant script he had traced 1,000 times in his memory. Ad astra per aspera. And below it the initials that had haunted his dreams for 22 years. LT and AT, Lucius and Anastasia Thorne. He said, his voice thick with a quarter-century of grief and a moment of impossible joy. Rosa stared at him confused. "What did you say?" "My name," he clarified, his gaze locked on hers. "My birth name is Lucius Thorne. Everyone calls me Sebastian now. My father's name was Liam. My mother was Amelia. But my sister's name was Anastasia." The world seemed to tilt on its axis for Rosa. Lucius and Anastasia, LT and AT, the initials on her pendant. It couldn't be. It was the stuff of daydreams, of fantasies she'd had as a lonely child. "I don't understand," she whispered, her head spinning. "We were on our parents' boat," he said, the story pouring out of him now. "There was a storm. It came out of nowhere. The boat capsized. I was 10 years old. You were 6. I remember holding on to your hand in the water, but a huge wave, tore us apart. They found me hours later, clinging to debris. They never found you or our parents. You were declared lost, presumed dead." He reached into his own coat and pulled out a heavy platinum card case. From a hidden compartment, he slid out an old, faded photograph. It was creased and worn from decades of handling. It showed a smiling boy of about 10, his arm around a little girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin. Around the little girl's neck, clearly visible, was the silver compass rose pendant. Rosa looked from the photograph to Sebastian's face, and for the first time she saw it. The resemblance wasn't in the jawline or the nose, which had been changed by age and hardship, but in the eyes. The same intense grey eyes as the boy in the picture. Her eyes. The backpack slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the floor. The strength went out of her legs, and she stumbled back, landing on the edge of the bed. My brother." The word felt alien on her tongue. "Anastasia," he said, taking a step closer, his face a portrait of disbelief and wonder. You survived. You've been alive all this time. The dam of a lifetime of loneliness, of questions of feeling utterly adrift, finally broke. Sobs racked Rosa's body, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, earth-shattering release. She wasn't an orphan. She wasn't a nobody. She wasn't Rosa Reed, the foster kid. She was Anastasia Thorne. She had a name. She had a history. She had a brother. Sebastian knelt in front of her, his own tears finally falling freely. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just let her see him, let the truth settle between them in the small, sterile room. I looked for you, he choked out. For years I hoped. But they told me to stop. They told me you were gone. She looked at him through her tears, at this powerful, wealthy stranger who was impossibly her family. I always felt like a part of me was missing, she whispered. Now I know why. In the quiet of the Haven House shelter, far from the world of glittering restaurants and corporate boardrooms, a brother and sister separated by tragedy and time finally found their way back to each other. The compass, after a lifetime of spinning, had finally pointed north. It had pointed home. The tiny room at the Haven House shelter, which moments before had felt like the final closing chapter of Rosa Reed's life, was now the birthplace of Anastasia Thorne's. The air was thick with the impossible reality of it all. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Sebastian remained kneeling before her, his gaze fixed on her face as if afraid she might vanish if he blinked. Anastasia, the name still felt foreign, a garment made for someone else, clutched the photograph in one hand and the pendant in the other, her two pieces of tangible history. Finally, Sebastian rose, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't the cold, commanding billionaire anymore. He was simply a man who had been given back a piece of his soul. We can't stay here, he said, his voice soft, as if speaking to a startled fawn. Let me take you home. The word home struck a discordant note in Anastasia's mind. Home had been a series of temporary rooms, foster houses, and cramped apartments. The concept of a true home, a place of belonging, was an abstract fantasy. She looked down at her worn backpack containing the entirety of her worldly possessions. Then she looked at the man before her in his perfectly tailored suit that likely cost more than she'd earned in a year. The gulf between their two worlds was a chasm. I don't know, she stammered, feeling a sudden overwhelming urge to run. It was all too much, too fast. I can't just... Sebastian understood. He saw the panic in her eyes. He had to ground this, make it real, but not terrifying. Okay. One step at a time, he said, his voice calm and reassuring. First, let's get you out of here. You don't have to decide anything. You don't have to do anything. Just let me make sure you're safe. Please, Anastasia. Hearing him say her name again sent a shiver through her. It was real. She looked into his eyes, and saw not a stranger, but the boy from the photograph. She gave a small, shaky nod. Sebastian made a single brief phone call. Marcus, bring the car to the front of the Haven House shelter on Westmoreland. Have a security detail sweep the area and maintain a discreet distance. No press. No one gets close. And cancel my entire schedule for the next week. As they walked out of the shelter, Anastasia felt the eyes of the receptionist on her. The woman's expression was one of pure astonishment as she watched the young woman who had checked in an hour ago, destitute and defeated, now leaving with the infamous Sebastian Thorne. The moment they stepped outside the chasm between their worlds became blindingly apparent. A sleek black Audi A8, silent and imposing, was waiting at the curb. a man with a professional demeanor. Marcus held the rear door open. Anastasia hesitated, clutching her backpack strap. This was a car she'd only ever seen in movies. It felt like stepping onto a different planet. Sebastian gently placed a hand on her elbow. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm right here." She slid into the plush leather interior, the door closing with a soft, solid thud that sealed off the sounds of the city. The car smelled of leather and quiet wealth. Sebastian got in beside her, and the vehicle pulled away from the curb with a smooth, silent grace. Anastasia watched the drab facade of the Haven house recede the last remnant of her old life, disappearing in the rearview mirror. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows. Anastasia stared out, watching the world she knew, the bus stops, the cheap diners, the laundromats go by from inside a bubble of impossible luxury. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice small. "To my home," Sebastian replied. Our home for now. It's quiet. It's private. No one will bother you there." He paused, then added, "There are things I kept, things that belonged to our parents. Photographs. Your room. I never changed it." The thought of a room untouched for 22 years, waiting for a ghost, sent a fresh wave of emotion through her. When they arrived at the private underground garage of his penthouse building, he led her to a private elevator. It opened directly into his apartment, a sprawling, breathtaking space of glass, steel, and minimalist art. The entire city glittered below them like a carpet of scattered diamonds. It was beautiful, but it was also cold, vast, and achingly lonely. Anastasia felt like a sparrow in a cathedral. "I know this is a lot," Sebastian said, sensing her unease. "There's a guest wing. It's more comfortable, less stark. I had the staff prepare it for you. Fresh clothes, whatever you need." "I have my backpack," she said, holding it up slightly, a pathetic shield against this new reality. A pained expression crossed Sebastian's face. "Of course," he said quickly. He wouldn't push. He led her to a suite of rooms that were larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, with a soft bed, a private bathroom, stocked with luxurious items, and a window with the same stunning view. "Rest," he said from the doorway. "We can talk whenever you're ready. Or we don't have to. Just rest." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Anastasia stood in the center of the room, her backpack still slung over her shoulder. She walked to the window and pressed her hand against the cool glass. She was here in this palace in the sky, but she had never felt more lost. She was no longer Rosa Reed, but she wasn't sure how to be Anastasia Thorne. Later that evening, after a long shower where she let the hot water wash away the grime of the last week, she found Sebastian in a large study. He was staring at a framed document on the wall. A map. "It's a nautical chart of the area where the boat went down," he said, without turning. "I've spent years going over it with experts, looking for a different current, a different possibility, anything to explain how they could have missed you." He turned to her. He had changed out of his suit into a simple grey cashmere sweater, looking younger and less formidable. "They told me you were gone," he said, his voice raw. "A child psychologist told me I had invented a memory of you surviving to cope with the trauma. For years I let myself believe them. It was easier than the hope, which was excruciating." "I don't remember," Anastasia confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I have dreams sometimes. Water, the color blue, a feeling of being cold, and a song, a lullaby, that's all." Sebastian's eyes welled up. "Mother used to sing you a lullaby every night, about a silver star. The pieces were scattered, but they were starting to fit. They spent the next hour talking, filling in the vast, empty spaces of their shared history. He talked about their parents, their childhood home, his lonely life after the accident. She talked about the blur of foster homes, the constant feeling of being an outsider, the fierce independence she'd had to cultivate to survive. As she spoke about her firing, Sebastian's expression hardened the comforting brother, momentarily replaced by the ruthless CEO. He picked up his phone. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Tying up a loose end," he said, his voice flat and cold. He dialed a number. "Get me Jonathan Henderson," he commanded without preamble. A moment later, "Henderson, this is Thorne. Your career in the hospitality industry is over. You will be terminated by morning. If you ever work in this city again, in any capacity, I will personally acquire the company that hires you and liquidate your position. Goodbye." He hung up. Anastasia was stunned by the casual, absolute power in his voice. "And Mrs. Delacroix?" she asked. "She is a more complex problem," Sebastian said, his jaw tight. "She committed fraud. She framed you. She deserves to be in prison." He looked at Anastasia, his expression softening. "But her fate is not my decision to make. It's yours. Tell me what you want to happen to her, and it will be done." Anastasia thought for a long time. Her first instinct was anger, a desire for revenge against the woman who had humiliated her and pushed her to the brink. But then she thought of the abject terror on Beatrice's face as she would be exposed and ruined. She had lived a life of powerlessness. She didn't want her first act of power to be one of pure destruction. "I don't want her to go to jail," she said finally, surprising even herself. "I want her to pay. I want every dollar she tried to scam from the restaurant to be donated to Haven House. I want her to sell her fake jewelry and her real clothes and give that money away too. And I want her to work. I want her to volunteer at the shelter's soup kitchen for a year. I want her to see what real desperation looks like." Sebastian stared at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile. In her decision, he saw not weakness, but a strength and compassion that had survived everything. He saw the heart of the sister he remembered. "Consider it done," he said. He then walked to a safe hidden behind a painting and pulled out a small velvet-covered box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark blue silk, was a heavy silver signet ring. It was carved with the same compass, rose as her pendant. "Father's," he said. "He had them made as a set. One for him, one for you." He picked it up and pointed to the inside of the band. Engraved there was the same motto, "Ad astra per aspera." He held it out next to her pendant, which she had placed on the desk. The two pieces of silver separated for 22 years were finally reunited. Brother and sister. Lucius and Anastasia. The compass and the ring. For the first time, looking at the two objects together in the quiet luxury of the study, it felt completely, undeniably real. "Welcome home, Anastasia," Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. And for the first time, she didn't flinch at the word. She was home. From a humiliating firing to an unbelievable reunion, Rosa's, or rather Anastasia's, story is a stunning testament to the power of hope and the unbreakable threads of destiny that can connect us even across decades of separation. Her journey from the depths of despair, clutching a simple silver pendant, to the stunning discovery of her true identity, and the embrace of the brother who never truly stopped searching, reminds us that our past is never truly lost, and that justice sometimes finds a way. It's a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, a miracle might be waiting just around the corner, sparked by the smallest of clues. If this incredible story of loss, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family moved you, please let us know by hitting that like button. Share this video with friends, family, or anyone who needs a reminder that hope is never truly gone. And for more unforgettable, real-life dramas that will capture your heart, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. What was the most shocking part of the story for you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Power can be worn like $1,000 suit, sharp, loud, and demanding attention. For the titan of industry Sterling Vance, it was the only kind he understood. But sometimes power is quiet, worn like a simple waitress's uniform, observing the world from the shadows. On one fateful evening, these two worlds collided. He unleashed his fury on a server over a spilled glass of wine, a brutal display to put a nobody in her place. He had no idea that this quiet waitress held a secret that would not only cost him his dignity, but shatter the very foundations of his empire. This is the story of how a single act of arrogance ignited an epic downfall. The Gilded Sparrow was not merely a restaurant, it was a testament to old New York money, a sanctuary carved out of mahogany and hushed ambition. The air itself seemed curated thick with the scent of beeswax, aged leather, and the subtle tantalizing aromas wafting from a kitchen that operated with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Every piece of silverware was polished to a mirror shine, every crystal glass was free of the slightest smudge, and every member of the staff moved with a rehearsed, almost silent grace. It was a place where deals were sealed with a handshake over a bottle of 1982 Chateau Margaux, and reputations were built or broken between the appetizer and the main course. Into this meticulously controlled environment, Serafina Ross, known to her colleagues simply as Sarah, was an anomaly. For the past 3 weeks, she had been learning the intricate dance of a high-end waitress. She wasn't the most experienced, but she was by far the most observant. She saw the nervous tick of the young banker in corner booth, Seven trying to impress his clients the way the formidable matriarch at table 3 subtly controlled her family's conversation with the slightest narrowing of her eyes, and the lonely widower at the bar who ordered the same single malt scotch every night, nursing it as if it held the ghost of a shared memory. Sarah learned the menu until she could recite the origin of every ingredient. She learned the wine list, understanding the subtle difference between a Bordeaux from the left bank versus the right. Most importantly, she learned to be invisible a phantom in a crisp black uniform there, to anticipate a need before it was spoken, to fill a glass, without interrupting a sentence, to be a seamless part of the restaurant's perfect machinery. Her colleagues, most of whom had been working there for decades, were initially wary of the newcomer. She was quiet, diligent, and had a strange calmness about her that was unsettling in the high-pressure environment. She never complained about difficult customers or long hours. She just watched, learned, and absorbed everything. Tonight, a palpable tension hummed beneath the restaurant's usual quiet dignity. Mr. Peterson, the restaurant's manager for 25 years, scurried between tables, his brow perpetually damp with sweat. The Gilded Sparrow had recently been sold. The previous owners, the Devancourt family, had been forced to part with their legacy after a series of financial misfortunes. The new owner was an enigma, a name whispered, with a mixture of fear and curiosity, Nathaniel Harrington. No one had met him. All they knew was that he was a titan of a different sort. New money, a portfolio that spanned from tech startups to sustainable energy, and a reputation for being both brilliant and unconventional. The staff feared a culling, a modernizing sweep that would render their decades of traditional service obsolete. Sarah, however, felt a different kind of pressure. Her purpose here was deeper than just earning a paycheck. She felt the weight of every interaction, every cleared plate, every polite smile. At 8 o'clock, the heavy oak doors swung open, and Sterling Vance made his entrance. He didn't just walk into a room, he conquered it. Tall, impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than Sarah's car. He had a face that belonged on the cover of a business magazine. Sharp, jaw-piercing grey eyes, and an expression of supreme, unshakable confidence. He radiated an aura of impatient power that made people instinctively step out of his way. On his arm was Bianca, a woman who seemed molded from the same expensive clay, her dress shimmering her laughter, sharp and artificial. Mr. Peterson practically materialized at Sterling's side, his posture bowing with deference. "Mr. Vance, a pleasure. Your usual table is ready, of course. It had better be." Peterson Sterling said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the ambient chatter. He scanned the room with a critical eye, as if appraising its assets and finding them wanting. "And I want the 95 Lafitte. Make sure it's been decanted for exactly 1 hour. Not 59 minutes, not 61. I sent a reminder this afternoon. Did you get it?" "Yes, of course, Mr. Vance." Immediately, Peterson stammered, already snapping his fingers at a passing sommelier. Sarah was assigned to their section. A senior waiter, Thomas, gave her a look of pity. "Good luck," he muttered under his breath. He once sent back a steak because he claimed he could hear the cow's regret. And he wasn't joking. Sarah simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She approached the table, her notepad in hand. "Good evening. My name is Sarah, and I will be your server tonight. May I start you with some water?" Sterling didn't even look at her. He was busy scrolling through something on his phone, his thumb moving with aggressive speed. Bianca, however, gave Sarah a slow, dismissive once-over, her eyes cataloguing the simple uniform, the plain but neat bun of her hair, and the absence of expensive jewelry. The assessment ended with a faint, condescending smirk. "We'll have sparkling, San Pellegrino, with lemon, not lime, and the slices must be thin. Last time they were wedges." "I don't want wedges," Bianca said, her tone implying that this was a common and exhausting failure of the serving class. Of course, Sarah replied, her voice even. She made the note and retreated, feeling the weight of their dismissive energy like a physical cloak. She returned with the water, served it precisely as requested, and waited. Sterling was still engrossed in his phone. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more moments?" she asked politely. Sterling finally looked up from his phone, and his grey eyes fixed on her for the first time. It was not a look of acknowledgement, but of annoyance, as if a piece of furniture had just spoken. "Are we ready, Bianca?" he asked, not breaking his gaze from Sarah. "I'll have the seared scallops to start, and then the Dover sole," Bianca announced. "And for you, sir?" Sarah asked, turning her attention to Sterling. He held her gaze for a beat too long, a subtle power play. "I will have the Wagyu tartare. And for my main, the ribeye. It is to be cooked medium rare. But I mean a true medium rare. A warm red center. If I see even a hint of pink, pushing towards medium, or if it's cool in the middle, it's going back. Is that understood?" "Perfectly," Sir Sarah said. "A warm red center." She repeated the order back to them flawlessly, her memory sharp. As she turned to leave, Sterling's voice stopped her. "And you," he said, his voice laced with a cold authority. "Try to keep up. This is not a diner. We're on a schedule." Sarah paused, her back still to him. She took a quiet breath, composing herself against the sting of his rudeness. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze over her shoulder. "Your satisfaction is my priority, sir," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. She then walked away, her steps measured and deliberate, leaving a wake of arrogant silence behind her. She could feel his eyes on her back, cold and appraising, utterly unaware that the woman he saw as a mere functionary, a temporary obstacle in his evening, was observing him with an intensity and purpose he could never possibly comprehend. The storm was gathering, and a single bottle of red wine was about to become its catalyst. The first course proceeded with a tense, unspoken precision. Sarah delivered the scallops and the tartare, placing them on the table with the delicate care of a bomb disposal expert. Sterling inspected his dish, prodding the raw meat with his fork, as if searching for a flaw. Finding none, he gave a curt, dissatisfied nod and began to eat. Bianca, for her part, regaled Sterling with stories of corporate takeovers and office politics, her voice a constant high-pitched hum in the otherwise serene atmosphere. Sarah moved around them like a ghost, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, always silent, always efficient. The sommelier, a nervous man named Jean-Luc, approached with the 1995 Chateau Lafite Rothschild. He presented the bottle to Sterling with the reverence of a priest presenting a holy relic. The 1995 Mr. Vance. Decanted for precisely 1 hour as you requested. Sterling waved a dismissive hand, not even looking at the label. Just pour it. Jean-Luc's hands trembled slightly as he poured a small amount into Sterling's glass. Sterling lifted it, not to savor the aroma, but to inspect the color against the candlelight with the cold eye of a diamond appraiser. He swirled it once aggressively, then took a sip. He didn't swallow immediately, letting the wine sit on his palate, while his face hardened into a mask of deep displeasure. "Is this a joke?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. Jean-Luc paled. "Sir, is there a problem?" "A problem," Sterling echoed, a cruel smile touching his lips. "This wine is cool. It's not cellar temperature. It's refrigerator temperature. Did you chill it? Do you have any idea what over-chilling does to the tannins in a first-growth Bordeaux? It seizes them up, strangles the bouquet. This is an $8,400 bottle of wine, and you've treated it like a cheap rosé. Get it away from me." "My deepest apologies." Mr. Vance Jean-Luc stammered, his face ashen. He quickly retreated with the bottle, and decanter looking utterly defeated. Bianca placed a hand on Sterling's arm. "Darling, don't let them ruin our evening. They're just incompetent." "It's the principle of the thing," Sterling muttered, his eyes scanning the room for Mr. Peterson. "It's a lack of respect. For the wine, for the customer, for the entire institution of fine dining." Sarah, standing by her service station, a dozen feet away, had heard every word. She felt a knot of anger tighten in her stomach. It wasn't just the arrogance. It was the casual cruelty, the way he wielded his knowledge not for appreciation, but as a weapon to belittle and humiliate. The main courses were ready. Sarah picked up the 2 heavy plates, her focus absolute. She approached the table, just as Mr. Peterson arrived, wringing his hands. "Mr. Vance, I cannot apologize enough for the error with the wine. We are sourcing another bottle from our reserve cellar immediately. There will be no charge, of course." Sterling waved him away with contempt. "Just get it right this time." Sarah stepped forward to place Bianca's Dover sole before her. Then she turned to place the ribeye in front of Sterling, and in that precise, fateful moment, a busboy rushing from the kitchen with a heavy tray stumbled. To avoid a full-on collision, he lurched to his left, bumping hard into Sarah's arm, just as she was setting the plate down. It was a moment of horrifying slow motion. The heavy ceramic plate tilted. The perfectly cooked medium-rare ribeye, resting in a rich Bordelaise sauce, slid. It wasn't a catastrophic spill, not a full plate on his lap. It was worse. A single thick, dark red rivulet of sauce cascaded from the edge of the plate landing, directly onto the crisp white cuff of Sterling Vance's immaculate, custom-made shirt. A collective gasp seemed to be sucked from the air around the table. The busboy froze his face, a mask of pure terror. Mr. Peterson looked as if he might faint. For a heartbeat there was absolute silence. Sterling Vance looked down at the crimson stain spreading slowly across the starched fabric of his cuff. He didn't move. He simply stared at it, his jaw tightening until the muscle bulged. Then very slowly, he lifted his gaze from his ruined shirt and fixed it on Sarah. The look in his eyes was not just anger, it was pure, unadulterated venom. "You," he began, his voice a whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "You clumsy, incompetent fool." Sarah stood frozen, the now empty plate still in her hand. "Sir, I am so sorry." It was an axy, "Do not speak to me," he snarled, cutting her off. He rose slowly to his feet, his full height towering over her. Every eye in the restaurant was now on them, conversations dying in mid-sentence. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? This shirt is Sea Island cotton. It costs more than you make in a week. But it's not about the money. It's about the sheer, breathtaking ineptitude." He held up his stained cuff for all to see. This is what happens when standards are allowed to slip, when they hire people off the street with no grace, no training, no sense of their surroundings. You are a liability in a place like this. Sarah's face was pale, but her eyes held a spark of defiance. "Sir, it was an accident." "The busboy, I don't care about the busboy," Sterling roared, his voice now echoing through the silent dining room. He pointed a trembling finger at her face. "I care about the person serving my table. You are a disgrace to this establishment." "Peterson," he bellowed, turning his fury on the manager, who was already rushing forward with a cloth and a bottle of club soda. "Get her away from my table. I don't want to look at her for another second." "She is fired." "Do you understand me, fired? I want her gone. Now." Bianca watched the scene with a smug, satisfied smile, as if this was precisely the entertainment she had been hoping for. The young busboy had already vanished, likely hiding in the kitchen, convinced his career was over. Mr. Peterson looked from Sterling's furious face to Sarah's calm, yet strained expression. He was trapped. To defy a customer like Sterling Vance was professional suicide. "Miss," he said to Sarah, his voice pleading, "please, just go to the back." Sarah didn't move. She looked directly at Sterling, her voice quiet, but clear, cutting through the tension. "So your shirt can be cleaned. Your behavior, however, has left a permanent stain on this restaurant tonight." The audacity of her statement hung in the air, stunning everyone into silence. Sterling's face, already red with anger, darkened to a deep purple. He took a step closer to her, his fists clenched at his sides. "You insolent little... Who in the hell do you think you are?" He seethed, his voice dropping back to a menacing hiss. "You are nothing. A nameless face serving me food. You exist in my world for the next 90 minutes, and then you disappear. You have no right to speak to me, let alone pass judgment on me." He turned back to Peterson. "I am not asking you, Peterson. I am telling you. Fire her, or I will make it my personal mission to destroy this restaurant. I will write reviews, I will speak to my contacts, and I will ensure that by this time next year, this place is a boarded-up relic. Is that clear?" The threat was not idle. Everyone knew the power Sterling Vance wielded in the city. Mr. Peterson, his face slick with sweat, finally broke. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and desperation. "Sarah, please just go. Clock out. We'll talk tomorrow." It was a dismissal, a capitulation. Sterling Vance had won. He smirked, a look of triumphant cruelty on his face as he watched Sarah. He expected her to scurry away in tears, broken and humiliated. But she didn't. She simply held his gaze for a long moment, a silent promise passing in that look. Then, with a quiet dignity that was more powerful than his rage, she placed the plate she was still holding onto her service tray, turned and walked toward the kitchen, her back straight, her steps unhurried. She did not look defeated. She looked like a queen in exile, temporarily relinquishing her throne, but with every intention of returning to reclaim it. The kitchen doors swung shut behind Sarah, muffling the charged silence of the dining room. Inside, the usual controlled chaos of clanging pans and shouted orders had ground to a halt. The kitchen staff, from the executive chef to the dishwashers, had heard Sterling's tirade. They looked at Sarah with a mixture of awe and pity. The young busboy who had caused the incident, a teenager named Leo, was huddled in a corner, his face buried in his hands. Sarah walked over to him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. He flinched, expecting a reprimand. "It wasn't your fault, Leo," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Accidents happen. What happened out there was not about a spilled sauce." Leo looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. "But he said you were fired. Because of me." "Mr. Vance does not have the authority to fire me," she stated simply, a statement of such quiet confidence that it momentarily silenced the entire kitchen. She patted Leo's shoulder once more. "Now pull yourself together. We have a service to finish." She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on a clean counter. Chef Antoine, a burly man with a fiery reputation, approached her, wiping his hands on his apron. "Mademoiselle Sarah," he said, his French accent thick with concern. "That man is a pig. What Peterson did, unforgivable. Do not worry. You are a good worker. I will speak to him." "Thank you," Chef Sarah replied, giving him a small, appreciative smile. "But I think it's best if I handle this myself." She walked to the small, windowless staff locker room at the back. The adrenaline from the confrontation began to fade, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. She wasn't just angry or humiliated. She was disappointed. She had spent the last 3 weeks observing the soul of the Gilded Sparrow, and tonight she had seen a rot at its core, a culture of fear that allowed the wealthy and powerful to act without consequence, and a management that would sacrifice its own staff to appease a bully. Her husband, Nate, had warned her this might happen. When they had acquired the restaurant, it was Sarah's idea to work there, incognito. "I can't fix a place if I don't know what's truly broken," she had argued. "Financial reports and customer surveys don't tell you about the culture, Nate. They don't show you the fear in a busboy's eyes, or the manager's willingness to crumble." He had been hesitant, worried for her, but ultimately he had trusted her judgment, as he always did. She pulled out her phone and stepped into the alley behind the restaurant. The city's cacophony, a stark contrast to the stifled atmosphere inside. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, you." Nate's voice was warm, a familiar comfort. "How's the front line? Still enjoying your secret mission?" "You could say it's been an eventful evening," Sarah said, a wry tone in her voice. She quickly recounted the entire episode, from Sterling Vance's entrance and his complaint about the wine to the spilled sauce and his demand for her termination. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She reported it with the calm, factual clarity of an intelligence officer debriefing her commander. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Nate finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier warmth, replaced by a steely edge. "What's his name again?" "Sterling Vance, CEO of Vance Capital Acquisitions." Another pause. "I know him." Nate said, his voice flat. "We've crossed paths on a few deals. He's a shark. Thinks of people as assets or liabilities, nothing in between. And Peterson just let him fire you." "He told me to clock out and go home," Sarah confirmed. "He was terrified. Nate, Vance threatened to ruin the restaurant." "He threatened our restaurant," Nate corrected her. The possessive pronoun sharp and deliberate. "And he humiliated my wife." Sarah could picture him perfectly sitting in his study, his relaxed posture gone, his mind already working, connecting dots, formulating a strategy. He was a builder, not a destroyer like Vance, but when someone threatened what he loved, his response was swift and decisive. "So what's the next move?" he asked. "The original plan was for you to observe for another week before we introduce ourselves to the staff." Sarah looked back at the kitchen door. She could hear the muffled sounds of the restaurant getting back to its rhythm, but she knew it was a fragile piece. The staff would be walking on eggshells, and Mr. Peterson would be sweating bullets, wondering what to do with her tomorrow. "The plan has changed," Sarah said, her voice filled with a new resolve. "The observation phase is over. We can't fix a culture of fear by hiding in the shadows. We need to turn on the lights, all of them. When tomorrow morning, call a mandatory all-staff meeting, 9 a.m. sharp. Tell them the new owner will be there to address the future of the Gilded Sparrow." And Mr. Vance Nate asked a hint of what was to come in his tone. "Oh, he'll be there too," Sarah said, a faint, determined smile playing on her lips, "though he won't know it yet. I looked him up earlier this week, just out of curiosity since he's such a regular. Vance Capital has been trying to buy this entire block for redevelopment for the past 6 months. The Gilded Sparrow under the Devancourt was the last holdout. He probably thinks with a new, unknown owner he can finally push the deal through." Nate let out a low whistle. So his little power play tonight wasn't just about a shirt. It was about establishing dominance, softening the target before the kill. "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "He was marking his territory. He just chose the wrong person to mark it on. Send him an invitation." "Nate, from you, an urgent meeting to discuss a mutually beneficial real estate opportunity. Make it for 9:30 at the restaurant." A slow, appreciative smile was evident in Nate's voice. "I see. You're not just turning on the lights, are you? You're setting a stage. The Gilded Sparrow has always been a theatre." Sarah replied, her eyes glinting in the dim alley light. "It's time for a new play to begin, and this time we're writing the script." She ended the call feeling the last vestiges of her waitress persona slip away. The uniform felt like a costume now. She walked back inside, past the still nervous kitchen staff, and went to her locker. She changed out of the uniform and into her own clothes, simple jeans and a sweater, yet she wore them with an authority that had been absent before. As she walked out the back door and into the cool night air, she didn't look back. The era of the invisible waitress was over. Tomorrow, Serafina Harrington, co-owner of the Gilded Sparrow, would make her debut. Nathaniel Harrington's office on the 54th floor of the Harrington Tower was the antithesis of Sterling Vance's world, where Vance's aesthetic was cold, hard-edged and ostentatious, all chrome, black marble and glass. Nate's was a sanctuary of warm woods, soft lighting, and comfortable, well-worn leather chairs. The walls were lined not with awards or framed magazine covers, but with architectural blueprints of his projects, a sustainable community center in a low-income neighborhood, a state-of-the-art public library, a park built on reclaimed industrial land. A massive picture window offered a god's-eye view of the city, but Nate often sat with his back to it, preferring the human-scale plans on his desk. He was a man whose power was quiet. He didn't need to raise his voice, because when he spoke, people listened. He commanded loyalty, not through fear, but through respect and a shared vision. After the call with Sarah, he sat in the stillness of his office for a long time, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen galaxy. He wasn't just angry, he was offended on a fundamental level. He and Sarah had built their life and their businesses on a simple principle: value the person, not the position. From the janitor to the lead engineer, everyone had a name, a story, and inherent worth. Sterling Vance's worldview was a direct assault on that principle. He pictured Sarah standing there in her simple uniform, absorbing the vitriol of a man who saw her as less than human. He felt a surge of protective fury, but he quickly reined it in. Rage was Vance's tool. It was clumsy and imprecise. Nate's tools were strategy, patience, and the careful application of leverage. He picked up the phone and dialed his assistant, a preternaturally calm woman named Catherine. "Catherine, I need 2 things," he said, his voice level. "First, draft an email to the general manager of the Gilded Sparrow, a Mr. Peterson. Inform him of a mandatory all-staff meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in the main dining room. I will be there to introduce myself as the new owner and discuss my vision for the restaurant's future." "Yes, Mr. Harrington," Catherine replied, her typing audible in the background. "Second, I need you to contact the office of Sterling Vance at Vance Capital Acquisitions. Set a meeting for me with him. Tomorrow 9:30 a.m. The location will be the Gilded Sparrow. Tell his assistant it's regarding the building acquisition he's been pursuing. Use the phrase, a time-sensitive and highly lucrative proposition. Vance can't resist bait like that. Consider it done. Will there be anything else? Just one more thing. Get me our complete file on the Vance Capital real estate deal for that block. I want every feasibility study, every rejected offer to the Devancourt, every communication. I want to know it inside and out by morning. It will be on your desk within the hour." After the call, Nate leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. He thought about the Gilded Sparrow. It wasn't just another asset in his portfolio. It was the place he and Sarah had their first real date. He'd been a struggling architect with one big idea, and she'd been a graduate student in art history. They had saved for 2 months to afford a single meal there. He remembered the way the candlelight had danced in her eyes, the way she had spoken so passionately about the beauty of forgotten things, about restoring them to their former glory, rather than tearing them down. That was why they had bought it. The Devancourt family had been on the verge of selling to Vance, who would have undoubtedly gutted the historic building to make way for another soulless glass tower. When Nate heard the restaurant was for sale, he and Sarah had made an immediate above-asking offer, closing the deal through a subsidiary company to remain anonymous. Their plan was never to demolish it. It was to restore it, to polish the soul of the place, to make it a beacon of true hospitality, not just a feeding ground for the arrogant and wealthy. Sarah's undercover work was the first step in that restoration project, to understand its heart before performing surgery. Sterling Vance, in his blind arrogance, had just fast-tracked the entire process. He had revealed the deepest sickness in the restaurant's culture in a single ugly outburst. An hour later, as promised, a thick dossier landed on Nate's desk. He spent the next several hours poring over the documents, his mind absorbing every detail. Vance's plan was aggressive. He had already acquired every other property on the block. The Gilded Sparrow was the linchpin, the one piece that held his entire billion-dollar project at bay. The Devancourt had refused him on principle, unwilling to see their family's legacy demolished. Vance's offers had grown increasingly hostile. Now faced with a new, unknown owner, he was clearly preparing for a final assault. The meeting at 9:30 a.m. was his beachhead. Nate found a memo detailing Vance's strategy, a lowball initial offer to the new owner, followed by a campaign of public pressure and legal intimidation to force a sale. Vance likely assumed the new owner was a small-time restaurateur who could be easily bullied. He had no idea he was walking into a meeting with Nathaniel Harrington, a man who could buy and sell his entire company without a second thought. But this wasn't about money. It was about principle. It was about the look of fear in a busboy's eyes, the spinelessness of a manager, and the undeserved humiliation of the woman he loved. As the first hints of dawn began to streak the sky, Nate closed the file. He knew Vance's strategy, his motivations, his vulnerabilities. He had his own blueprint ready. The stage Serra had spoken of was set. The cast was assembled. All that remained was for the curtain to rise. He picked up his phone and sent a simple text to his wife. "See you at the theatre. I've saved you a front row seat." The following morning at precisely 8:00 a.m., Sterling Vance strode into the boardroom of Vance Capital Acquisitions. The room was a monument to his ego. A single massive slab of polished obsidian served as the conference table. The chairs were severe leather and chrome. The only art on the wall was a framed, stylized chart showing the aggressive upward trajectory of his company's stock price. His senior executives, already assembled, sat straighter in their chairs as he entered. "Report," he commanded, taking his seat at the head of the table without so much as a good morning. One by one they detailed their victories. A hostile takeover of a rival firm was nearing completion. A portfolio of distressed assets had been acquired for pennies on the dollar and was being stripped for parts. Sterling listened, his expression a mixture of boredom and impatience. This was routine. The thrill of the hunt was gone. "What about the Astor Block project?" he asked, cutting off a vice president mid-sentence. "What about the Gilded Sparrow?" A junior executive eager to impress spoke up. "Sir, as you know, the Dvancourt finally sold. The new owner is an unknown operating through a shell corporation called Harrington Hospitality. We've had difficulty piercing the corporate veil, but our analysts suggest it's likely a small independent operator. A chef owner, perhaps," Sterling smirked. "A chef? Good. They're artists, sentimental, easily broken." He leaned back, a predatory gleam in his eye. "I had dinner there last night. The place is resting on its laurels. Stale. The staff is incompetent. The management is weak. A perfect target." His chief legal counsel, a man named Garrett, cleared his throat. "We received a communication from the new owner this morning, sir. He's requested a meeting. Today, at 9:30. Sterling raised an eyebrow. "So soon he's eager. What's the angle?" He described it as a time-sensitive and highly lucrative proposition. Garrett read from his tablet. A low chuckle rumbled in Sterling's chest. "He's trying to play hardball. The little chef thinks he can scare me into a higher offer. Pathetic." He tapped his fingers on the obsidian table, the sound like cracking ice. "I was there last night. I made my presence felt. Put the fear of God into the manager over a clumsy waitress. By now the new owner has heard the story. He knows who he's dealing with. This meeting is his white flag." He looked around the table at his team. "Garrett, you'll come with me." We walk in. I make a firm, non-negotiable offer, 20% below our last offer to the Dvancourt. I'll give him a sob story about the declining prestige of the location, the cost of renovations. When he balks, we remind him of the legal and financial pressure we can bring to bear. We'll have him signing the papers by lunch. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. As he walked toward the door, he paused to adjust the cuff of his fresh shirt, a pristine, brilliant white. "Oh, and Garrett," he added, a cruel smile touching his lips. "Remind me to get the name of that waitress I had fired last night. I might send her a gift basket, as a thank you for making my job this morning so much easier." Across town, in the cozy kitchen of their brownstone, Nate and Sarah Harrington were having a very different kind of morning meeting. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee and toasted brioche. There were no executives, no obsidian tables. It was just the two of them sitting opposite each other at a rustic wooden table. Sarah was dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue dress. The waitress from the night before was gone, replaced by a woman who exuded a quiet, unshakable confidence. She was recounting the names and personalities of the staff she had worked with: Thomas, the cynical but decent veteran waiter; Maria, the kindly hostess who remembered every regular's name; Leo, the terrified young busboy. "They're good people, Nate," she said, stirring her coffee. "They're just beaten down by a culture that's taught them the customer is always right, even when the customer is a monster. Peterson isn't an evil man. He's a weak one. He's so afraid of losing the history of the place that he's allowed its soul to corrode." Nate listened intently, nodding. He had the complete file on the Vance deal spread out on the table next to the butter dish. Vance thinks he's meeting a small-time operator he can intimidate. He has no idea that you're the reason we bought the place, or that I'm Harrington Hospitality. "He's walking into an ambush he laid for himself," Sarah said. "His arrogance is his Achilles' heel. He can't imagine a world where the waitress he humiliated holds any kind of power. To him, I was just part of the scenery." "Well," Nate said, reaching across the table to take her hand, "the scenery is about to bite back. Are you ready for this?" Sarah squeezed his hand, her gaze firm. "I'm not doing this for revenge, Nate. Revenge is what he would do. I'm doing this to send a message, to our staff, and to him. A message that decency isn't a weakness, and that respect is the most valuable currency we have. We're not just saving a building today. We're restoring its foundation." They finished their breakfast in comfortable silence, a partnership built on shared values and mutual respect. Theirs was an empire not of acquisitions and hostile takeovers, but of creation and restoration. While Sterling Vance was sharpening his knives for a kill, Nate and Sarah were preparing their tools for a groundbreaking. They left the house together, driving not in a chauffeured town car, but in their own modest electric vehicle. They were two architects on their way to inspect a new project, a project that began not with demolition, but with clearing out the rot that had been allowed to fester for far too long in the gilded cage of a restaurant they now called their own. The main dining room of the Gilded Sparrow was filled with an anxious energy. It was 8:55 a.m., and the entire staff, from the chefs in their starched whites to the dishwashers in their aprons, was gathered among the tables. They stood in nervous clusters, whispering amongst themselves. The news of a mandatory meeting with the mysterious new owner had sent a ripple of fear through them. Mr. Peterson stood near the front, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief, his face a pasty shade of grey. He had spent a sleepless night, agonizing over the incident with Mr. Vance and the subsequent firing of Sarah. At precisely 9 o'clock, the main doors opened. The staff fell silent, turning in unison to see their new boss for the first time. Nathaniel Harrington walked in. He was not what they expected. He wasn't an imperious tycoon or a flamboyant celebrity chef. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored blazer and slacks, and he moved with a calm, approachable demeanor. But it was the person who walked in, beside him, who caused a wave of audible gasps to sweep through the room. It was Sarah. She was not in her uniform. She was wearing the elegant navy blue dress from that morning, standing beside Nathaniel Harrington, not as an employee, but as an equal. She met the shocked and confused gazes of her former colleagues with a calm, steady expression. Thomas, the veteran waiter, stared with his mouth agape. Leo, the young busboy, looked as if he had seen a ghost. Mr. Peterson's face went from grey to a stark, bloodless white. He looked back and forth between Nate and Sarah, the horrifying truth beginning to dawn on him. Nate and Sarah walked to the front of the room. Nate stood before them, his hands clasped casually behind his back. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice filling the room. It was a calm, resonant voice without a hint of arrogance. "Thank you all for being here. My name is Nathaniel Harrington, and along with my wife, Seraphina." Harrington, he gestured to Sarah, whose nod of acknowledgement sent another shockwave through the staff. "We are the new owners of the Gilded Sparrow." The room erupted in frantic whispers. His wife? The waitress from last night was the owner's wife. The implications of the previous evening's events settled over them with the weight of a physical blow. Nate held up a hand, and the room fell silent again. "I know you have many questions, and I promise we will answer them. We bought this restaurant because we love it. We love its history, its character, and most of all the potential for what it can be, a place known not just for its food, but for its unparalleled hospitality, and for the respect with which it treats both its guests and its staff." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, finally landing on Mr. Peterson, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "My wife has spent the last 3 weeks working alongside you all, not to spy, but to understand, to learn from you, to see what makes this place tick, and to identify where we can be better." And last night, his voice hardened slightly. She received a masterclass in what is broken here. At that moment, the front doors of the restaurant swung open again. Sterling Vance, followed by his lawyer, Garrett, strode in. He was early for his 9:30 meeting, a classic power move to catch his opponent off guard. He saw the assembled staff and the man speaking at the front and smirked. "Apologies for the interruption." Sterling's voice boomed, dripping with false sincerity. "I seem to have walked into a staff meeting. I have a 9:30 with the new owner." Nate turned to face him. "You're right on time, Mr. Vance. I'm Nathaniel Harrington." "We spoke on the phone." Sterling's eyes widened slightly in recognition. He knew the name Harrington, of course. A major player. This was more interesting than he thought. His smirk returned undeterred. "Harrington. A pleasure. I was just telling my legal counsel that I'm very much looking forward to discussing the future of this property," he said, extending a hand. Nate ignored the hand. "We'll get to that. But first, you're part of this meeting now. You were the star of last night's show, after all. It's only fitting you be here for the reviews." A flicker of confusion crossed Sterling's face. He scanned the front of the room again, his gaze passing over Nate, and then landing on the woman standing next to him. And then he saw her. It was the waitress. The recognition did not hit him like a lightning bolt. It was a slow, creeping horror that drained the color from his face. His brain struggled to reconcile the image of the meek, uniformed servant from the night before with the poised, elegant woman standing beside the powerful Nathaniel Harrington. He looked at her, then at Nate, then back at her. The name echoed in his mind. Seraphina Harrington, the owner's wife, the woman he had verbally eviscerated, the woman he had called a clumsy, incompetent fool, the woman he had demanded be fired. His confident smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure shock. The air in his lungs seemed to evaporate. Every bit of his bravado, his arrogance, his carefully constructed sense of superiority crumbled to dust in that single devastating moment of recognition. "You," he whispered, the single word barely audible. Sarah met his gaze, her expression not of triumph or malice, but of profound disappointment. "Me," she confirmed, her voice clear and steady. "Sterling Vance, the titan of industry. The boardroom shark, the man who prided himself on always being 10 steps ahead, was utterly and completely trapped." The theatre doors had been locked, the house lights were up, and he was the villain of the play, exposed for all to see. He had walked in, expecting to dictate the terms of a surrender, only to find he was attending his own execution. The silence in the dining room was absolute, thick with the weight of Sterling Vance's dawning horror. Every staff member stood as still as a statue, witnessing a power dynamic shift so seismically it felt as though the very floor was tilting. Sterling's lawyer Garrett looked utterly bewildered, glancing between his client's ashen face and the calm couple at the front of the room. Nate let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, allowing the full gravity of the situation to settle upon Sterling. Then he spoke, his voice calm, but infused with the unyielding strength of steel. "Mr. Vance." He began, his gaze fixed on the shell-shocked man. "You came here today to make an offer on this building. You believe it to be the last piece of a puzzle for your new development project. You came here assuming you would be dealing with a small-time owner you could easily intimidate. Let me be unequivocally clear. This property is not for sale. Not to you. Not ever." He took a step forward, his focus unwavering. "But your real estate ambitions are not why we are here. We are here because of what happened in this room last night. You see, my wife and I believe that the foundation of any successful enterprise is respect. It's a simple concept, but one you seem to find profoundly difficult to grasp." He turned his attention to the assembled staff. "Last night, one of you was publicly humiliated, verbally abused, and wrongfully dismissed not because of a mistake, but to satisfy the ego of a bully. The mistake itself, a simple accidental spill, was trivial. The reaction to it was not. His eyes found Leo, the young busboy who was watching with wide, terrified eyes. "Leo, step forward." Leo hesitated, then shuffled nervously to the front. "Leo," Nate said kindly, "last night was not your fault. You are a valued member of this team. From now on, know that the ownership of this restaurant will always have your back. You will never be made to feel small in this establishment again." He gave the boy a reassuring nod, and Leo retreated, a look of profound relief on his face. Nate's gaze then fell upon Mr. Peterson, who was visibly trembling. "Mr. Peterson, you have managed this restaurant for 25 years. You have preserved its history, and for that you should be commended. But you have also allowed a culture of fear to take root. Last night you were faced with a choice: defend your employee's dignity or appease a wealthy customer. You chose to sacrifice your employee. You stood by silently while she was berated, and then you carried out Mr. Vance's illegal demand that she be fired." Peterson opened his mouth to speak, to offer an excuse, but Nate held up a hand. It was not an easy position to be in. Nate conceded, his voice softening with a hint of pity. "But leadership is defined by the choices we make in difficult moments, and in that moment you failed. You failed your staff, you failed this restaurant, and you failed the very principle of hospitality. Effective immediately, your employment here is terminated." The finality of the statement was a thunderclap in the room. Firing a 25-year veteran was a powerful statement. Nate wasn't just pruning a leaf. He was cutting out what he saw as the root of the problem. Finally, Nate turned his full attention back to Sterling Vance, who had not moved, his face a frozen mask of disbelief. "And now to you, Mr. Vance. You wanted my waitress fired. Instead, I have fired my manager for not protecting her from you. You threatened to destroy this restaurant. Instead, you have shown me exactly what I need to do to rebuild it. You see people like Sarah, people who serve you as nothing, nameless faces who exist only for your convenience." Nate walked slowly toward him, closing the distance between them until they were only a few feet apart. Sarah stood her ground, watching a silent partner in this dismantling. "Let me tell you who that nothing is," Nate said, his voice dropping to a low, intense level. "She is Serafina Harrington. She holds a master's degree in art history and is one of the most respected restoration consultants in the country. She is a board member on 3 major charitable foundations. She is my partner, my equal, and the heart of this entire enterprise. That woman you called incompetent and graceless possesses more integrity, intelligence, and grace in her little finger than you have in your entire being." Every word was a hammer blow to Sterling's shattered ego. He was being publicly dissected, his arrogance laid bare for all to see. "Your offer for this building is rejected," Nate continued, his voice resonating with finality. "Your standing as a patron of this restaurant is revoked. You are no longer welcome here, and I would advise you to reconsider the way you do business, because the world is smaller than you think, and you never know who you might be talking to." Nate stepped back, standing beside his wife once more. The message was clear. The reckoning was over. Sterling Vance stood there for another moment, his face a maelstrom of humiliation and fury. He looked at Sarah, searching for a hint of triumph, of gloating, but he found none. He found only a calm, steady gaze that offered no quarter and no satisfaction. It was the gaze of a judge who had already passed sentence. Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode out of the restaurant, his lawyer scrambling behind him. The heavy oak doors swung shut, leaving behind a room full of stunned staff and the dawn of a new era. Sarah finally stepped forward, addressing the team herself for the first time as their new owner. "My name is Serafina Harrington," she began, her voice warm but firm. "What you witnessed today is the end of the old way of doing things. From this moment on, the Gilded Sparrow will be a place built on mutual respect. We will be a team. We will support each other. And we will provide the best service in this city, not because we are afraid of our customers, but because we take pride in our craft. The work of rebuilding begins today, and I am honored to be doing it with all of you." A tentative, then growing round of applause filled the room. For the first time in a long time, the air in the Gilded Sparrow wasn't filled with fear or tension, but with a fragile, yet powerful sense of hope. The gilded cage was broken, and its inhabitants were finally free to fly. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a mistaken identity. It was a story about the true nature of strength. Sterling Vance believed strength was loud, aggressive, and built on the fear of others. He learned in the most public and humiliating way possible that he was wrong. True strength is often quiet. It's the dignity of a waitress holding her ground. It's the resolve of a leader who values people over profit. And it's the unbreakable bond between two people who know that a real empire isn't built of glass and steel, but of respect and integrity. The Gilded Sparrow was just a restaurant, but on that day it became a classroom, and the lesson was one Sterling Vance would never forget. What did you think of this story? Have you ever witnessed someone in a position of power underestimate the person right in front of them? Let us know your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and unexpected twists, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to see it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will make you think.